She weighed 53 pounds. He weighed 230, and she was the only thing standing between him and dying alone in those Tennessee woods. The dog found him first. That was the thing nobody would fully understand later when the adults tried to reconstruct the afternoon and make it into something with a clear beginning and a reasonable explanation. The dog was the beginning. A half-starved mutt with one torn ear and a tail that never stopped moving regardless of circumstances, the kind of animal that had survived long enough on nothing to develop opinions about everything. He had been living behind the row of trailers on Route 9 for 3 weeks, eating whatever Nora Maddox slipped through the chain-link fence when her mother was not watching. She had not named him. She understood in the wordless way of children who have experienced loss that naming something created a contract, and contracts could be broken in ways that left marks. But that Tuesday afternoon in October, he ran and she ran after him, and that was how it started. The woods behind Harlan were not the kind of woods that invited you in. They were serious woods, dark at the shoulders, full of roots that grabbed at your ankles, and old logging trails that had gone back to mud, and a quality of silence that pressed against your ears, the way deep water pressed against your eardrums. Most children in town stayed out. Most adults did too, unless they had a reason. Nora Maddox had been coming in since she was 5 years old. She ducked under the chain-link gap at the back of the lot, without slowing her backpack snagging for half a second, before she pulled free and plunged into the tree line after the dog. She could hear him ahead of her, paws on dry leaves moving fast, and she tracked the sound the way her grandfather had taught her to track sound, not by chasing it, but by reading its direction and staying slightly to the side of it. Buck Maddox had taught her a great many things. He had done it in this forest in the years before his knees went, and then his lungs, and then everything else, spending Tuesday and Thursday afternoons moving through these trees with his granddaughter at his side, pressing rope into her small hands, crouching beside her over animal tracks in the mud, sitting against a white oak, while the afternoon light changed, and explaining in the plain, unhurried voice of a man who had been a dojo instructor for 30 years, that the world was a series of problems, and the only question that mattered was whether you had learned to read them before they read you. He had never explained why he was teaching her these things specifically. She had never asked. There was an understanding between them that went beyond explanation, the understanding that exists between people who think in the same register, who do not need the scaffolding of reasons, because the work itself was the reason. Buck Maddox had built something in his granddaughter quietly and precisely, and without ceremony, over 300 and some afternoons in these same woods. And 2 years after his death, she still came out here on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because the woods themselves had become a form of conversation with him. The dog stopped. Nora stopped too, 10 feet behind him, because she had learned to read the dog the same way she read everything, by watching what his body said before his behavior confirmed it. His hackles were up. His good ear was forward. His tail had gone completely still for the first time since she had known him, and he was staring upward with an intensity that told her this was not a squirrel or a raccoon or something routine. She followed his gaze. The man was hanging from the lowest heavy branch of a white oak 40 feet ahead, suspended upside down by his ankles, his arms dangling toward the ground, his leather vest falling away from his torso, so that his face was partially obscured by its own weight. He was large in the way that certain men are large, wide through the shoulders, built from years of physical work rather than any particular intention. And he was wearing the Hell's Angels patch on the back of the vest, the Death's Head patch that everyone in Harlan knew. and most people gave a wide berth to without being able to articulate exactly why. His face was turned slightly to the left. The left side was badly bruised, one eye swollen completely shut, a cut above the eyebrow that had bled heavily and then dried in a dark streak down his forehead toward the ground below him. His beard was matted. His wrists bore the raw, abraded marks of something that had bound them and then been removed. The skin broken in places, the pattern of the damage, telling her even from this distance that he had been bound for a long time and had worked to get free. He had gotten his hands free. He had not been able to do anything more than that. His chest moved, slowly, unevenly, but it moved. Nora stood at the edge of the clearing and assessed the situation with the methodical precision that Buck had spent years teaching her, and that the world had spent years assuming a child her age could not possess. She was 8 years old. She weighed 53 pounds. She was alone in the woods on a Tuesday afternoon with an unconscious man who had been deliberately suspended from a tree by people who had taken considerable care with the knots, and who were, according to everything the scene was telling her, planning to come back. The dog looked at her. She looked at the dog. "Okay," she said quietly, and she set down her backpack. She did not think about running. This was the thing that would confuse adults most when they heard the story later, the thing they would circle back to with furrowed brows and phrases like, "But surely you must have considered. And were you not frightened? And what were you thinking?" The answer to all of those questions was that she had considered the situation. She had been frightened in the way that fear functions when it is operating correctly, rather than incorrectly as information. Rather than paralysis, and what she had been thinking was exactly what Buck had trained her to think in precisely this kind of moment. She had been reading the problem. The problem was as follows. A man was suspended upside down from a tree. The suspension had been deliberately engineered by people who knew what they were doing with rope, which meant the knots would be competent and would require a specific approach. The man was alive but unconscious. The amount of time blood had been pooling in his head suggested he had been up there for at least an hour, possibly longer. There were no other footprints visible at the clearing perimeter that she could see from her current position, which meant the people who had done this had left by a different route or had not been here recently enough to leave fresh sign. She could hear no engines in the immediate vicinity, which meant no vehicles on the logging road to the north, which was the only motorized access to this part of the woods. She moved toward him slowly, not running, circling wide so that she could see his face before she was directly beneath him. She needed to see the damage. She needed to understand what she was working with before she touched anything, because the wrong touch at the wrong time could make the wrong things happen. And Buck had been very clear about the sequence of operations in a field situation. Assess first, then act. Never the other way around. She completed her circuit and crouched down 3 feet from where his fingers were grazing the leaf litter. And she looked at him and she ran the inventory in her head the way she had been taught to run it. The eye was swollen shut, which meant significant blunt force trauma to that side of the face. The cut above the eyebrow was deep enough to have bled substantially, but the bleeding had stopped, which told her the cut was not actively life-threatening at this moment. The wrist marks indicated previous restraint with at least 2 different binding materials. His boots were field-worn and heavy and caked with dried mud. The rope around his ankles was a double wrap. She traced it with her eyes from the ankle binding up and over the branch and down to the trunk where it was secured. She could see the knot at the trunk from her position. She recognized it. She had learned that knot sitting on a stump 400 yards from this spot on a Thursday afternoon 3 years ago, with her small hands working the rope over and over, while Buck watched and corrected and waited, with the patience of a man who understood that knowledge did not install itself through instruction, but through repetition and failure, and repetition again. The knot at the trunk was a constrictor hitch with a secondary friction wrap underneath it. The constrictor would hold indefinitely under the load of the man's weight. The friction wrap was the access point, the place where the system could be interrupted if you understood its logic, if you knew which direction, applied mechanical disadvantage rather than advantage. She knew which direction, but she needed to reduce the load first. She needed something to take the weight off the rope at the branch before she could work the trunk knot, or she would be fighting the man's full body weight the entire time. And she was 53 pounds, and he was not. She looked around the base of the tree. There was a section of deadfall partially buried under leaf litter. To her left, a branch about 4 feet long and 4 inches thick, old enough to be hard, but not so far gone as to be rotten. She tested it with her hands. Solid. She dragged it over to the base of the trunk and positioned one end under the section of rope between the branch above and the knot below. Then applied her weight to the other end, using the leverage principle Buck had made her practice until she could do it in the dark. The rope shifted. Just a fraction. Just enough. Her fingers found the tail of the friction wrap, and she pulled, and the secondary binding came loose in a single clean motion, and she released the deadfall, and stepped back, and took a breath. Now the constrictor. This was the harder part. The constrictor would not release cleanly from a straight pull. You had to approach it from what Buck had called the cheating direction, the angle that interrupted the knot's internal logic, rather than reinforcing it. He had made her tie and untie a constrictor hitch perhaps 200 times across a dozen different afternoons. Not because she would necessarily need to untie a constrictor hitch from a tree. With a man's body weight on the line, though, here they were. But because the discipline of learning a thing thoroughly enough to reverse it was a discipline that applied to everything, she positioned herself. She found the angle. She began to work. It took 4 minutes. She counted. When the knot gave, it gave completely, and the man fell. She had understood intellectually that he would fall when the knot released, but she had not fully accounted for the speed and weight of it, and he came down in a sudden crashing heap, landing on his left side in the leaf litter, and the impact produced a sound from somewhere deep in his chest that was not a word and was not a cry, but was something between the two, something raw and involuntary that told her he had registered the landing even if he was not fully conscious. She stood absolutely still for 2 seconds. Then he moved. His right hand pressed against the ground. His head turned. One eye opened, the right one, since the left was sealed shut by swelling, and it found her face with the unfocused intensity of a man trying to determine if what he was seeing was real or a product of the particular confusion that comes from being upside down for too long. "Don't try to stand up," she said. She was already moving toward him, crouching down, pulling the small first aid kit from her backpack. "Your blood has been pooling in your head. You need to stay flat on your back and let your heart redistribute it. If you sit up too fast, you will pass out again." He stared at her. She met his gaze steadily. "You're a kid," he said. His voice came out rough and broken, stripped of whatever register it normally occupied. "I know," she said. "How old are you? 8? He stared at her for another moment. Then something happened in his face that was not quite a laugh. and not quite a sound, something that his ribs immediately punished him for attempting, and he let it go with a controlled exhalation through his nose. "Lie flat," she said. "Both arms at your sides. Let your legs extend." He did it, not because she had told him to, she sensed, but because his body was not currently offering him any better options. He lay flat on his back in the leaves with his eyes closed and his breathing shallow and irregular, and she checked his pulse at the wrist, which was fast but present, and she began cleaning the cut above his eyebrow with the cloth from her kit. "What's your name?" she said, keeping him engaged. Buck had explained the importance of conversation in a field recovery situation. The way that communication kept the brain oriented and the body anchored. "Dex," he said. "Dex Harlow. I'm Nora. How'd you find me?" She glanced at the dog who had positioned himself about 8 feet away and had not moved since the man hit the ground. He was watching the situation with the attentiveness of an animal that understood more than it was letting on. "Dog," she said. Dex processed this with his eyes closed. "Dog," he repeated. He ran into the woods and stopped. She pressed the cloth gently against the cut, and he hissed through his teeth. She kept the pressure steady. I followed him. She paused. "How long were you up there?" "Don't know," he said. "A while. Lost track." She nodded, though he could not see her. The dried blood and the degree of swelling in his face told her it had been at least an hour, probably closer to 2. Long enough for serious physiological effects. Long enough for the people who had put him there to have gone and come back, or to be in the process of coming back. "Who did this to you?" The shift in him was subtle, but she caught it. The same quality of stillness that came over animals when they were deciding whether to trust something or run from it. He was deciding how much to tell her. "People I've had a disagreement with," he said carefully. She unwound a section of the bandaging cloth and began wrapping the cut. "What kind of disagreement?" "The kind where they wanted something I wouldn't give them." She secured the bandage. She looked at his wrists. The binding marks were significant. The skin abraded in 2 distinct patterns, rope and something synthetic zip ties, probably from a separate binding session before the rope. She began treating the worst of the abrasions. "Are they coming back?" she said. The pause was exactly 1 second too long. "Probably," he said. Nora absorbed this. She did not change her expression. She finished with his left wrist and moved to his right. And she thought about what the pause had meant and what it implied about the timeline of the afternoon and what she needed to do about it. "Can you wiggle your toes?" she said. He tried it. "Yeah. Both feet. Good." She sat back on her heels. "That means the circulation is returning to your legs. We have about 2 minutes before you can try to sit up." She paused. "Then we need to move you. There is a hollow about 100 yards northwest of here that is not visible from more than 10 feet away. I know how to get there." He opened his good eye and looked at her. She looked back. "You're 8 years old," he said again. Not accusatory. Something more like a man recalibrating. "Yes. And you know there's a hollow 100 yards northwest. My grandfather and I mapped this section of the forest." She paused. "He taught me where everything was." He was quiet for a moment. "Where's your grandfather now?" She kept her face even. "He passed 2 years ago." Dex said nothing. He said nothing in the way of a man who understands that "I'm sorry" is too small for some things and has the discipline to recognize that and stay quiet instead. She appreciated that more than she would have been able to articulate. "Can you sit up?" He put his hands flat against the ground. Tried. The color left his face for a moment. She was already there, her shoulder against his left arm. Her weight braced against his. Not enough to lift him, but enough to give him something to push against. He got his upper body off the ground and held it there, breathing through his nose, the gray in his face slowly resolving back towards something closer to normal. "Give it a second," she said. "I'm all right," he said. "You're not yet, but you're getting there." The dog crept forward, ears low tail moving in a slow, uncertain arc, the specific behavior of an animal that wanted to offer something and was not sure if it was welcome. He pressed his nose against Dex's boot and stayed there. Dex looked down at him. Something happened in the set of his jaw, a fraction of yielding that he probably did not know was visible. "Good dog," he said quietly. "He doesn't have a name yet," Nora said. Dex looked at her. Then he put his hand on the ground and began the process of getting to his feet. And she positioned herself where she would be useful, her shoulder against his ribs, and they rose together, which from the outside would have appeared an incongruous image. A large man in a Hell's Angels vest, and a small girl with a backpack, rising from the forest floor as a single unit. He made it upright. He swayed. His hand found the trunk of the white oak and stayed there, and his legs shook in a way that told her they would be carrying him, but not smoothly, not yet. "We need to move," she said. She was already adjusting her backpack, already orienting herself to the northwest by the angle of the light coming through the canopy. "There is a specific way to walk in these woods without making noise. I will show you the path. If you feel like you are going to fall, tell me before it happens so I can step away." He looked at her. Stayed. "Follow me," she said. And they went. The 100 yards to the hollow was the longest 100 yards Nora had navigated in 3 years of Thursday afternoons in these woods. Not because the distance was difficult, but because she was managing 2 problems simultaneously. The problem of moving a 230-pound man with compromised mobility across rough terrain as quietly as possible, and the problem of the sound she had heard while she was working the knot. She had not told Dex about the sound yet. She was waiting until he was in the hollow, until he was stable and seated, and his legs had stopped shaking. There were things you told a person when they could absorb them, and things you held back until the time was right. And she had learned this from watching Buck deal with difficult news. The way he paced information rather than delivering it all at once, the way he gave people the ground under their feet before asking them to run on it. The hollow was exactly where she had left it, a natural depression at the base of a limestone slope backed by an outcropping that created a low overhang invisible from more than 10 feet away. If you did not already know, it was there. She had found it 2 summers ago during a tracking exercise. Buck had set her a red bandana hidden somewhere in this section of the woods 45 minutes to find it. She had found the hollow in 22 minutes, and the bandana in 30. Buck had not said anything when she returned it to him. He had simply nodded the specific nod that meant the work had been good, and she had carried that nod for 2 years the way other children carried trophies. She guided Dex in and got him settled against the limestone wall. His back supported, his legs extended. He was pale from the effort, but his breathing had steadied, and his eye was tracking normally. "Stay here," she said. I need to go back. He looked at her. I need to cover the site. She kept her voice matter of fact. There are signs of your landing disturbed ground, a depression in the leaves. If they find the clearing and see those signs, they will know someone helped you. And if they know someone helped you, they will look for a second trail. She paused. I can reduce what they find. I cannot eliminate it entirely, but I can make them uncertain. Uncertain people make mistakes. Dex put his hand flat on the limestone wall behind him. He seemed to be having a conversation with himself about something. She watched it happen in the line of his jaw. How long will you be gone? He said finally. As long as it takes. She held his gaze. Stay in here. Do not move. Do not make noise. If you hear something, you freeze and wait. The hollow is not visible from the deer path to the east or the logging road to the north. As long as you are still, you are effectively invisible. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression had shifted from the initial disorientation of a man who had woken from unconsciousness to find himself on the ground with a child standing over him. What was there now was something more specific and harder to name. Not exactly trust. Something adjacent to trust. The thing that precedes trust in people who have learned not to give it quickly. Be careful, he said. She turned and walked back through the hollow entrance without answering. The clearing had changed in the way that spaces change after violence has occurred in them. The same trees, the same branch, the same white oak with its bark and its reaching arms. But something in the quality of the air was different. A kind of charge that her skin registered even as her mind was already moving past it into the practical work of the next 10 minutes. She moved fast and methodical, the rope first. She took the section she had untied from the trunk and coiled it quickly, the way Buck had taught her to coil rope, the alternating loops that kept it from tangling. And she put it in her backpack. The branch above still had bark abrasion from where the rope had ridden over it for hours. But that was ambient evidence, the kind that would tell a story to someone who already knew what story they were looking for. And she could not do anything about that. The landing site next. The depression in the leaf litter where Dex had hit the ground. The disturbed material, the dark spots that she did not examine too carefully. She used dead leaves gathered from 6 feet away to cover the spots, layering them with the loose randomness of a fall, rather than the deliberate pattern of concealment. And she broke up the edges of the depression with the side of her shoe, dragging the surface into something that read as general forest disorder, rather than a specific event. Not perfect. She knew it was not perfect. Perfect was not the objective. The objective was uncertainty, and uncertainty was achievable. The footprints last. She had left 2 sets of prints in the softer ground near the base of the tree, her small sneaker treads, and the heavier marks of Dex's boots. From the brief time he had been on his feet here, she worked backward from the tree toward the hollow's direction, using a pine branch to sweep the surface in the way Buck had shown her, keeping the strokes light and varied to mimic wind movement rather than deliberate erasure. She was 30 feet from the clearing when she heard the first motorcycle. She stopped moving. Not distant. Close. The sound of an engine cutting, then another, then 2 more in rapid sequence, each one going quiet in a way that told her the riders had stopped on the logging road to the north, which was the only vehicle-accessible approach to this section of the forest. She had known they would come from that direction. She had factored it into her timeline. She had not factored in how fast. She tucked herself against the widest trunk available and went completely still. And she listened. Footsteps on dry leaves. Multiple sets. Moving from the direction of the logging road toward the clearing, spreading out, as they came fanning through the trees with the practiced spacing of men who had done this kind of thing before. She counted 4 distinct sets of footfalls, 4 people minimum, possibly more. The voices reached her before the clearing did. He should still be where we left him. If he's still alive. He's alive. Rex Cutter's voice she would learn later. The flat, certain voice of a man who knew the specifications of what he had ordered and trusted that those specifications had been met. Eddie doesn't tie a knot that slips. A pause. The footsteps spreading further, moving into the clearing, now searching. Then a silence that was different from the other silences. Then, one word delivered in a register that was lower and quieter than the others, which was what made it carry further, which was what made it the voice she would remember most clearly from this afternoon. Gone. The eruption that followed was not quiet. She heard boots on the ground. Heavy movement, boots kicking at the leaf litter. A voice saying the rope is gone too. And another voice saying someone cut him down. And a third voice saying who knew he was out here. And a fourth voice answering nobody from our side knew he was out here. She pressed herself harder against the trunk. Then the quiet voice again. This was the voice of the man they called Gray, though she did not know that yet. He was the Scorpions member Rex Cutter used for the problems that required a specific kind of intelligence. The problems where force alone was insufficient, and where the situation needed to be read, rather than simply overpowered. She would understand all of this later. Right now, she only understood what his voice communicated, without her needing to know anything about him. This was the person in the group who was actually thinking. "Spread out," Gray said. "Whoever did this didn't drive. No vehicle could reach this position." They went on foot. Find the trail. She had covered the trail. She had covered most of it. She had not yet covered the section immediately around this tree. She looked at the ground around her feet and evaluated quickly, and without panic, because panic was not a lane she was permitted to operate in, and she knew it. She had approximately 6 feet of uncovered ground between her current position and the nearest sufficiently covered section to the northwest. She could not cover that ground silently under current conditions because the men in the clearing were too close and the air was too still, and a moving body at this range would register as sound. She needed them to make noise. As if in answer to this need, 2 of the voices in the clearing broke into argument, one insisting the trail led east and another insisting it led north. The specific argument of men who had found partial evidence and were reaching incompatible conclusions from it. The argument lasted perhaps 12 seconds and produced enough acoustic cover for her to take 4 careful steps to the northwest, heel-to-toe weight, distributed nothing sudden. She moved 15 feet. The argument peaked, and the quiet voice cut through it. "Stop talking," Gray said. "Look." Footsteps heading in her direction. She moved, not running. Running made birds lift and branches crack, and the kind of noise that carried specific information to trained ears. She moved fast and low through the trees, following the line in her head that led northwest toward the hollow, staying slightly east of the direct route because the direct route was what they would find if they found the trail at all, and she needed to introduce distance between herself and the direction of the hollow. A shout from behind her. Someone's moving, and then she ran. She ran the way Buck had taught her to run in the woods. Not the way you ran in an open field, but the way you ran through trees, shorter strides, arms closer to the body, eyes 2 steps ahead at all times, trusting the feet to find the ground while the eyes were already planning the next two decisions. She ran and she heard them behind her, crashing and loud, the sound of large men moving fast through terrain that did not accommodate large men moving fast. And she registered the crashing without fear, because crashing meant they were not gaining, crashing meant she was pulling away. She cut left sharply down a slope she knew flattened out after 20 feet into a creek bed. She heard one of the men try to match her angle and lose his footing on the slope. Heard the impact and the language that followed it. One person less. She vaulted the creek bank and kept moving. The footsteps behind her thinned. Two people still running, the others separated from the chase. She cut right hard up through a dense section of young pines she knew well, trees growing so close together that she could pass between them and a grown man could not without turning sideways and significantly reducing his speed. She went through. Behind her, the pursuit hit the pine section and stopped being a pursuit. She heard cursing. She heard the specific sound of branches being pushed by someone who had lost their target and was searching. She did not stop. She did not celebrate. She curved wide in a long arc, keeping her speed controlled, now moving with intention rather than urgency. And the arc brought her parallel to the logging road to the east of where the vehicles had parked. She needed to hear what they were saying, not because she was curious, though she was, because the next part of what she was going to do depended on understanding the specific shape of the problem she was dealing with, and she could not afford to operate on incomplete information. Buck had been clear about this, about the cost of acting without sufficient data, about the way that incomplete information dressed itself up as certainty and led you in the wrong direction with complete confidence. She found a position 15 feet inside the tree line south of the logging road, and she went still and she listened. The voices came back together over the next 4 minutes. The four men reconvening near the motorcycles. The argument about the trail resuming at lower volume, now more exhausted than heated. Then Gray's voice cutting through the rest. One set of tracks, he said. Small. Light. He paused. Child's shoe treads in the mud near the base of the tree. A silence. Then Rex Cutter's voice. A child cut him down. Another silence, this one with a different quality. The silence of men adjusting a previous assumption. How does a child know a constrictor hitch? One of them said. Gray's voice level and considering someone taught them. Rex Cutter find the child. He said it with the precise flatness of a man giving an order he expected to be carried out. I don't care how long it takes. Find them and bring them to me. Before tonight. Nora heard the word tonight and filed it. Then Rex Cutter said something else. Something addressed to the group at large, and what he said was what changed the entire shape of the afternoon. He said, everything is still on schedule. 10 o'clock tonight, the location I gave you, the Angels are going to get the message about Harlow around 8, and they will ride to where we tell them to ride, and they will find what we have prepared for them. He paused. Nobody changes that plan. Nobody deviates. Harlow being loose changes nothing because Harlow doesn't know the location, and by the time his people figure out tonight was a setup, it will be over. She stood in the tree line and absorbed this. She ran it through the same methodical process she applied to everything, laying each piece of information against the others and looking at the shape they made together. Dex Harlow had been used as bait. The real objective was never the information Rex Cutter wanted from him. Or not only that. The real objective was to trigger a response from the Hells Angels chapter, to create a provocation large enough and personal enough that they would move without thinking carefully about where they were moving to, and Rex Cutter had prepared a location and a reception for them that had nothing to do with a fair confrontation. People were going to die tonight at 10 o'clock, unless somebody changed the trajectory of the evening. She calculated the distance to the hollow. She calculated the distance to the county road east of the logging road. She calculated the distance between the current moment and 10 o'clock tonight, subtracting the time it would take to get Dex to safety, and the time it would take for Dex to contact his chapter, and the time it would take for any of this information to reach the people who needed it. The margins were not comfortable. She turned back toward the hollow. Behind her, she could hear Gray's footsteps moving away from the logging road and into the forest, moving carefully, reading the ground, following a trail that she had covered most of, but not all of, following it with the patient precision of a man who was good at exactly this and knew it. She moved faster. The dog heard her coming before she reached the hollow entrance, his head lifting his tail, beginning its uncertain movement. Dex was where she had left him upright against the limestone wall, and his eye tracked her entry with the immediate attention of a man who had been listening to the forest for the past 15 minutes and had heard enough to understand that the forest was not empty. She crouched in front of him. There were 4 of them, she said. They lost me in the pines to the north. One of them is looking for the trail. His name is Gray, and he is the one who thinks. She paused. There is something else. She told him about Rex Cutter's words on the logging road. She told him about 10 o'clock and the location and the plan that Cutter believed was still operational, regardless of Dex's current status. She told him in the same level voice she used for everything, not because she was not frightened she was, but because the thing fear was telling her right now was that there was no time for the performance of being frightened, and a great deal of time required for the performance of being useful. Dex listened without interrupting. She watched his face change as the information landed, the specific changes that happened in people's faces when they understood the full dimension of a problem they had previously understood only partially. He said, I need to make a call. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a phone. The screen was cracked badly. When he pressed the power button, it came on. 11%, he said. Make one call, she said. Short. He found the contact and pressed the button and held the phone to his ear. And Nora listened to the forest around the hollow and thought about Gray out there in the trees moving carefully, reading the ground getting closer. Dex spoke when the call connected. He said his name said, Don't Talk and Listen, gave a county road and a mile marker number that meant nothing to her but would mean something to the person on the other end. Said, Come quiet, no colors showing if you can help it. Said, Bring someone who can drive a truck. Said he would explain later. Said, Come. He ended the call. 4% remained. He handed her the phone. She looked at it. She looked at him. 30 minutes, he said. Trace will be here in 30 minutes. She put the phone in her backpack. She looked at the entrance to the hollow and listened. In the middle distance, moving from north to south through the forest with the unhurried, deliberate pace of a man who had not lost confidence, she could hear footsteps. One set, light and careful, getting closer. We need to be ready to move, she said. When I say go, we go. Dex put his hand flat on the limestone. I'll be ready. The dog pressed against Nora's leg. She put her hand on his back. The footsteps came on. The footsteps stopped. 20 feet from the hollow entrance, give or take, judging by the sound. Not because the man had found anything, because he was reading. Nora understood the difference between a man who stopped because he had lost a trail and a man who stopped because he was thinking about what the trail was telling him. The first kind of stop had frustration in it. The second kind had patience. The footsteps to the north had the second kind, and that meant Gray had not been deterred by the coverage work she had done. He had simply been slowed by it. She looked at Dex. He was already watching her, his eye tracking his body, pulled in tight against the limestone, with the controlled stillness of a man who understood that stillness was currently his primary contribution to the situation. She made a decision. She held up one finger to Dex, then pointed to the ground directly beneath his position. One gesture. It meant stay here. It meant stay still. It meant everything she would have said with words if words were available, and they were not. He nodded once. She pulled her backpack off, set it beside him without sound, and slipped out through the hollow entrance. The forest was late afternoon, quiet, the specific quiet of October in Tennessee, when the light has gone amber and the insects have given up, and the only sounds are what the wind and the animals and the occasional human introduce into the silence. She moved north along the limestone face away from the direction of the hollow entrance, staying close to the rock, and then she stepped into the open forest and let a branch move. Not a dramatic sound. A single branch displaced and released the kind of sound a person made when they were moving carelessly rather than carefully. The kind of sound that read as inattention rather than intent. The footsteps to the north paused. Then they changed direction. She moved again slightly further north, slightly faster, introducing more sound. Not running yet, but no longer trying to be silent, because the purpose now was not concealment, but direction. She was redirecting the attention of a man whose attention was currently pointed too close to the hollow, and the only tool she had for this was herself. The footsteps began moving toward her. She moved northwest, opening up distance, keeping the sound of her movement consistent enough to follow, but not so deliberate that it communicated trap. The trees around her were familiar. She had been in this section of the forest dozens of times on dozens of Thursday afternoons with Buck, and she knew its specific geography, the way she knew the layout of the trailer and the route to school, and all the other spatial maps that the mind builds through repetition. She knew where the ground dropped. She knew where it rose. She knew which sections would slow a large man and which would not. The man following her was not a large man, she noted. Gray moved with an economy that suggested someone who had learned to operate efficiently in confined and difficult terrain, and the sound of his footsteps was light for someone his apparent age and size. This was a different kind of follower than the ones who had crashed through the pines behind her earlier. This was someone who would not be easily shed. She needed space. She cut east hard and fast and let herself run, because running now communicated something specific. She had been found. She was reacting, she was fleeing. This was a story she wanted him to read. She wanted him following a running child through the woods. Not a methodical one, because a running child was a problem with a predictable solution, and she needed him to believe he was solving a predictable problem. She heard him accelerate behind her. She ran, through a stand of young hickory where the ground was firm, then up a short rise and over its crest, and down the other side. And here she cut south away from both the logging road and the hollow, taking a line she had walked enough times to trust. The forest changed character as she moved south. The trees thickening, the understory growing denser with the scrub growth that colonized the shadier sections. She heard his footsteps behind her, still tracking, still present, but the rhythm had changed. She could hear him making more decisions per step, the way you heard a person thinking through sound. She cut again, left this time abruptly into a section where the pines grew close enough together that she could pass between them. By turning her shoulders, and the average adult male could not pass between them at all, without stopping to angle through. She had measured this the way she measured things, by walking it repeatedly, and noting where her body fit and where it would not. She went through the pine section in 6 seconds. Behind her, she heard the sound that she had been counting on, the sound of a man's forward momentum meeting an obstacle he had not anticipated. Branches pushed hard. A controlled stumble, the specific noise of someone who was fast enough and skilled enough to avoid falling, but not fast enough to avoid slowing significantly. She did not stop. She curved south and then east and then south again in a long arc, eating distance, with the controlled pace Buck had called the traveling pace, the one you used when you needed to cover ground for an extended time without destroying yourself. She ran it for 4 minutes, which put her 250 yards from the pine section, with a clean angle back toward the county road to the east. And then she stopped, pressed her back against a broad oak, and breathed. The forest behind her was quiet. Not the quiet of someone who had stopped, the quiet of someone who was listening. She waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Then she heard him. Not behind her. Ahead of her and slightly south, moving at the same careful pace she had heard in the beginning, patient and deliberate, not the sound of someone who had lost the trail, but the sound of someone who had made a different calculation about where the trail was going to end. She came around the south side of the oak and looked. He was standing on the deer path that ran along the ridge southeast of her position, leaning against a tree with his arms crossed and his head tilted very slightly, reading the forest in the direction she had been running. He had not followed her through the pines. He had known she would curve, and he had known roughly where, and he had moved to intercept rather than pursue, which meant he had been 1 step ahead of her, thinking, which was a thing she had not accounted for. She looked at him. He was not what she had expected from the voices on the logging road. 50, maybe 52, close-cut gray hair, a face that had spent considerable time outdoors. He was wearing the scorpion's patch, but he wore it the way some men wore things they had been in long enough to stop seeing less a declaration than a habit. His eyes were moving across the forest in the direction she had come from, and she could see in the motion of them that he was gathering information, assembling it, constructing a picture of what had happened in the past 20 minutes. Then his eyes found her. Neither of them moved. She had been in this situation before. Not with this man, not in these specific circumstances, but in the structural sense. She had been here before, standing in the forest, with something large and uncertain between her and where she needed to be, with no clean path forward. That did not require moving through the uncertain thing rather than around it. Buck had a name for this situation. He called it the accounting moment, the moment where you added up everything you had and decided whether it was enough. She added up everything she had. Then she said in a normal voice with no performance in it, "You're pretty good at tracking." He went still for a moment, the kind of still that told her he had been expecting to locate a running child and had not expected the running child to speak first. "Show yourself," he said. "I'm right here," she said. She stepped out from behind the oak into his line of sight, into the open onto the deer path, and she stood there and let him see her clearly. "I'm just a kid. I'm not carrying anything." He looked at her, not the way the other men had looked when they were crashing through the forest with their voices raised. Carefully, The way a man looked at something that was not matching the category he had put it in. "How old are you?" he said. "8. What are you doing out here?" "Walking my dog." His eyes went to the space around her, the tree line, the path in both directions. She could see him processing, checking her statement against what he knew and what the physical evidence in the forest had told him. The dog was not here. She had left the dog with Dex. This was a liability in the story she was telling. And she watched him notice it, watched him file it without pressing it. He pushed off the tree and walked toward her slowly. The way men walked when they were confident they did not need to hurry, the way men walked when they believed they were the larger and more capable thing in any situation they occupied. She did not move. She watched him come and she kept her face even. And she ran the possibilities. "Did you see a man out here?" he said. He stopped 6 feet from her. Big, leather vest. "I saw him." "Rope in a tree," she said. "That's what I came over to look at. I thought it was a tire swing." She kept her voice in the register of a child describing something she had stumbled on without comprehension. "Then I heard the motorcycles, and I got scared and I hid." "And where is your dog?" "He got frightened by the noise. He ran toward the road." He studied her face. She held his gaze because she had learned from Buck that looking away was what liars did, and she was not lying. She was choosing which true things to say, which was a different operation entirely. Buck had explained this carefully. A true statement delivered with the right selection and the right timing was not deception. It was economy. It was the difference between giving someone all the information and giving them the information that was appropriate for the moment. She had seen a rope in a tree. She had been frightened by the motorcycles. Both things were completely true. The man in front of her was smart enough to sense something he could not quite locate. "What's your name?" he said. "Nora," she said. "Nora Maddox." The effect of the name was not dramatic. It was subtle, a quality of stillness that arrived in him that had not been there before, a micro-interruption in the smooth machinery of a man assessing a situation he believed he was in control of. His eyes did not widen. His expression did not change in any visible way. But something happened behind his eyes that was not the continuation of what had been there before. And she watched it happen and could not yet name what it was. "Maddox," he said. His voice had changed by a fraction, a degree of tone she would not have been able to describe, but would have been able to recognize. "From Harlan." "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and she looked back, and neither of them spoke. "Your grandfather," he said finally, and his voice was slower now. Careful in a way it had not been careful before. "His name was Buck, yes." The thing behind his eyes resolved into something she recognized from adults who had encountered a piece of information that relocated them, that moved them from one position to a different one, with the specific abruptness that came from a fact arriving without warning. He was not the man who had been sent to find the person who cut down Rex Cutter's prisoner. He was something else standing on a deer path in October in Tennessee, and he was working out what that something else was. She waited. "Buck Maddox ran a dojo in Harlan," he said. His voice had the quality of a man speaking aloud, something he was also examining internally, as if the saying of it would help him verify it. "He said it the way you said things you had not said in a long time." "Yes," she said. He exhaled through his nose. looked at the tree line to his left, then back at her. "I was 17 years old," he said. "My mother put me in his class because she had run out of other options. She didn't know what to do with me. She put me in the class and drove away and came back 2 hours later." He paused. "I stayed for 3 years. Nora was quiet. She kept her face still and she listened. And she did the thing Buck had always done, the thing she had watched him do with students and with people in general. The thing she had absorbed without being taught it directly. She gave the other person room. She did not fill the space. She let the silence be what it needed to be, and she waited for it to produce what it was going to produce." He talked about Nora's granddaughter, he said. Not by name. He talked about his student, the one who was coming along. He said she was the best student he had in 30 years. He said he had never told her because he didn't want her to stop working for it. The words arrived and she received them, and she stood in the October afternoon on a deer path in the woods behind Harlan, Tennessee, and felt them land in the specific place inside her that had been waiting for them. Without knowing, it was waiting the place that existed in children who have lost the people who shaped them and who carry the weight of that loss forward without having anywhere particular to put it. She had carried it for 2 years. She put it here. She did not let it show on her face, not because she was hiding it, but because some things were too large to perform, and this was one of them, and performing it would have made it smaller. "He told you this," she said. Her voice was steady. The man who called himself Gray looked at her, and what was in his face now was nothing like what had been there when he was following her through the forest. It was something quieter and more complicated, the expression of a person who has traveled a long distance and arrived somewhere they did not expect. "Yes," he said. She absorbed this. She let it settle. Then she moved because the afternoon was moving whether she moved with it or not, and there were things that needed to happen in the next several hours that would not happen if she stood on this deer path with this fact inside her. "Rex Cutter is setting a trap tonight," she said. She said it in the same level voice she used for everything, not as an accusation, as information. 10 o'clock at a location he's already chosen. He's going to send word to the Hells Angels chapter that Dex Harlow is dead. They'll ride to where he tells them to ride, and they'll find what he's prepared for them. She paused. "People are going to die." Gray looked at her. She looked back. "You know the location," she said. "I heard him give it to your group on the logging road." Gray said nothing. "If you let that happen," she said, "because of rules or history or because it's easier to let it happen than to stop it, that is not what Buck Maddox would want from you. That's not what he spent 3 years building." The silence that followed was not the silence of a man about to dismiss what he had just heard. It was the silence of a man absorbing the weight of what he had just heard and measuring it against the weight of everything else he was currently carrying, the years and the choices and the affiliations and the version of himself he had agreed to be when he agreed to be it. She waited. She let the silence do what silence did when you gave it room. He told her the location. He said it quietly, looking not at her but at a point in the middle distance, as if the saying of it required him to be looking at nothing specific. A county road intersection 4 miles east of Harlan. A barn on the north side, a field that spread south with no cover for 100 yards. In any direction, the kind of location that looked like a meeting point, but was designed to be something else entirely. She filed it. He looked back at her. "I'm going to tell them I lost the trail," he said. "I'm going back to the logging road, and I'm going to tell them the child ran, and I couldn't find them." He paused. "That's all I'm going to say." She looked at him for a moment. He held her gaze, and there was nothing evasive in it, nothing performing. He was telling her what he intended to do, and he was telling her honestly. "I didn't find you," she said. "When you came back the second time, you didn't find me and I didn't tell you anything." He understood what she was doing. She could see him understand it. She was giving him the cover he would need when Rex Cutter asked why he had come back empty-handed. She was giving him a story where his failure was simple tracking failure rather than deliberate choice. And she was giving it to him not because he had asked for it, but because it was the decent thing to do for someone who had done a decent thing. And because Buck Maddox had spent 30 years making people who understood the difference between decency and its absence. He nodded once. Then he turned and walked away north in the direction of the logging road, and she watched him until the trees absorbed him, and she could no longer see or hear him. She stood alone on the deer path for a moment. She thought about what Buck had said to this man, to a 17-year-old who was on his way somewhere bad, to someone he had apparently seen something in worth the investment of 3 years and the kind of words you usually reserve for people who were close to you. Best student he ever had. She had not known this. She had not known he thought it. She had spent 2 years coming to these woods on Tuesdays and Thursdays and talking to the trees and the air and the absence of him. And he had told this to a stranger on a logging road in Tennessee on a Tuesday, October afternoon almost 35 years ago. She turned and walked back toward the hollow. Dex heard her coming. She knew because the dog came to the entrance before she arrived at it. Tail moving pressure off, confirming safe approach. She came through the entrance and crouched in front of Dex, and he looked at her face with the attentiveness he had been developing across the afternoon, the particular way he had learned to read what she kept below the surface of what she said. "You're okay," he said. "There were 4 of them," she said. "Gray is the one who found me. He tracked back after the others lost me in the pines." She paused. "He knew my grandfather." Dex went still. She told him the parts she had decided to tell, the parts that were relevant to the operational situation. The location of the ambush, the 10 o'clock timeline. The fact that Gray had been told, the fact that Gray intended to say he had lost the trail. She told it in sequence and without editorializing. Then she told him the other part. The part that was not operational. The part that was just true. He said Buck talked about his granddaughter to Gray, she said. She kept her voice even. He said I was the best student he had in 30 years. He said he never told me because he didn't want me to stop working for it. She paused. Gray told me that, standing on the deer path. Dex was very quiet. She looked at him and saw something happening in his expression that she recognized because she had seen it in other people on the receiving end of facts. They needed time to assemble, and she gave him the room she always gave people who needed time. Then he said, "I need to tell you something." She waited. "Buck Maddox trained me," he said. His voice had changed from the voice he had been using across the afternoon. The voice of a man in a practical situation, working through practical problems. What was underneath it now was something older. I was 16. My aunt brought me to the dojo because my parents were gone, and I was on my way somewhere she could already see was bad, and she didn't know what else to do with me. He stopped. He took a breath. He kept me for 2 years. She looked at him. She absorbed the fact of it and held it and turned it and looked at its shape. She said, "He never told you about me either." "He didn't talk about people by name," Dex said. "He talked about principles. He talked about moments. He told me once that the most dangerous thing he had ever taught anyone was the habit of reading a situation correctly, because once you knew how to read a situation correctly, you had no excuse for misreading it on purpose. He paused. I have spent 20 years reading situations on purpose wrong because it was more convenient than reading them right. She was quiet for a moment. The hollow was dim with late afternoon light. The limestone wall behind Dex casting the shadow that made the space what it was, and the dog was pressed against Dex's leg, with his chin on Dex's knee. And the forest beyond the entrance was quiet, in the way of a forest that has finished with one set of events and has not yet begun the next. We need to reach the county road, she said. Trace is coming. After we reach the road, you need to contact your chapter. You need to give them the location of the ambush, and you need to tell them not to go to the location Rex Cutter sends them to. She paused. Can you walk it? He tested his legs against the ground. The shaking from earlier had largely resolved the circulation, having done the work it needed to do over the past 45 minutes. He had color in his face, and his eye was tracking with normal clarity. I can walk it, he said. Then let's go. He got to his feet with less ceremony than the first time, assisted but not carried. And she positioned herself to his left, and they moved out of the hollow into the late afternoon forest. The 3/4 mile to the county road was not an easy 3/4 miles. The ground was uneven, and the light was changing as the sun moved behind the western ridge, and the temperature was dropping in the specific way it dropped in Tennessee in October. Not sharply, but persistently, the kind of cold that announced itself through layers. She set the traveling pace and watched Dex match it with the concentration of a man who was using effort and will in roughly equal measure to substitute for physical resources that were currently operating below full capacity. They moved through sections she knew well, past the stand of old hickory where Buck had once sat on a root, and explained the difference between cover and concealment to a 6-year-old who had asked why they always stopped in certain places and not others, through the low area where the ground softened in wet weather and was now crunching under their feet with the texture of nearly dry mud. Along the base of the secondary limestone ridge, where a section of the rock had fallen away years ago and left a ledge that Buck had used as a landmark, calling it the cathedral. She navigated by these landmarks with the confidence of someone who had learned them so thoroughly. They had become part of the internal map she operated from, rather than a set of instructions she had to consult. Dex was quiet as they moved, conserving what he needed to conserve, which she respected, and which told her something about him, about the kind of person he was when he was stripped of the surface things and operating from whatever was underneath. Buck used to say, she said after a stretch of silence that felt like it had room for something in it, that you could tell what a person was made of by what they talked about when they were in the middle of something hard. People who talked about the pain were telling you one thing, and people who talked about where they were going were telling you something different. What do people who stay quiet tell you? Dex said. She thought about this for a moment, picking her way across a section of exposed root. They tell you they've done this before, she said. He was quiet for a few more steps. Then, what are you going to tell your mother? The question landed with more weight than its surface suggested, and she understood that he was asking not to make conversation, but because the question was connected to something he was thinking about that she had not fully seen yet. The truth, she said. He didn't say anything to that for a while. She kept coming out here, he said, eventually not as a question. After he passed. Yes. Because of this, he said, gesturing at the forest around them in a way that was not about the trees. Because of what he put here. She thought about how to answer that. She walked 4 more steps before she found it. He didn't just teach me where things were, she said. He taught me how to be in places. There's a difference. She paused. In a classroom, you learn what people already figured out. Out here, you learn how to figure things out. He said those were 2 different kinds of knowledge and you needed both, but most people only got one. Dex processed this with the slow absorption she had noticed in him, the way he took things in fully before responding. He said something like that to me once, Dex said. He said there were men who could follow and men who could think, and occasionally you found someone who could do both. And when you did, you didn't let them waste it. He stopped walking for a moment to navigate a dip in the terrain, and she stayed close on his left. Then he said, I was going to be one of those, or I was going to be nothing, and it was entirely up to me. What did you say? I was 16, Dex said. I said I understood. He said, no you don't, but you will. She almost smiled. She recognized the phrasing. She had heard variations of it across 300 afternoons in these same woods. They reached the county road as the last of the direct light was leaving the sky, the gray gold of a Tennessee October evening spreading across the treetops. She held them back at the tree line for a full minute, watching both directions of the road, reading what the space offered. Clear, she said, and they moved. The gravel shoulder of the county road felt different under her feet than the forest floor, harder and more certain. And the open sky above them after the closed canopy of the trees created a specific quality of exposure. She registered without letting it change anything she was doing. She found the mile marker 30 yards up the shoulder, the green sign Dex needed, and she confirmed the number with him. And he said it matched what he had given Trace. She sat on the gravel shoulder because her legs were willing to stop if she gave them the option. And the dog came immediately and pressed against her side, and she put her arm around him without thinking about it. Dex lowered himself to the ground with controlled care, favoring his right side where the ribs were, and sat with his legs extended and his hands in his lap. They waited. She counted the time in her head the way Buck had taught her to count time, without a watch, using breath and internal rhythm to estimate minutes. 11 minutes, 12, 13. How bad are the ribs, she said. 2, maybe 3 cracked, he said. Not broken through, I've had worse. He said it without self-pity and without performance, just as a factual assessment of a physical condition. And she noted it and did not press. He looked at the position of the sky to the west. What time do you think it is? Around 6, she said. Maybe 6:15. Trace should be close. She nodded. Then she said the thing she had been holding back since the deer path. The piece of the situation that was not about the operational problem, but about the larger one, the one that would still be there after tonight was resolved or not resolved. Rex Cutter's plan for tonight, she said. Even if we stop it. That doesn't end the thing between your club and the Scorpions. That's just tonight. Dex looked at the road. No, he said. It doesn't end it. What does it do to it? He thought about this. Opens a different possibility, he said. If tonight doesn't happen the way Rex planned it. If the ambush is a failure, there are people in that group who are going to question whether Rex's judgment is what it used to be. There are people who have been in this situation long enough to be tired of it. Gray is one of them, he said, and she heard something in his voice that was not certainty and not hope, but the specific quality of a man looking at something he has not let himself look at directly in a while. The fact that he told you the location tells me something about where he actually stands. He didn't tell me, she said. She said it carefully. He decided not to prevent me from knowing. There's a difference. Dex looked at her. She looked back. He almost laughed, and the ribs vetoed it with a precision that crossed his face and was gone. "Buck," he said, shaking his head slowly. She looked at the road. An engine sound came from the east, still distant but growing, and the dog lifted his head, and his ears moved forward. She watched the road. A truck appeared around the curve a quarter-mile away, moving fast, slowing as the mile marker came into view. Trace Dex said. The certainty in his voice was the certainty of a man identifying something he knows by its pattern. The way you identified the sound of an engine you had heard 1,000 times. The truck pulled to the gravel shoulder and stopped, and the door was opened before the engine had fully quieted, and a man came out moving at the specific pace of someone covering ground efficiently without technically running. He was heavier than Dex, wider through the chest, with a face that had decided at some point to stop managing what it expressed. He crossed to Dex, and he looked at him, and she could see in the comprehensive inventory his eyes ran, that he was checking for the things that mattered: damage and status and the fact of being present and upright. "Brother," he said. His voice had the texture of a man who had been holding something tight for a while and was in the process of releasing it. "I'm standing," Dex said. "Barely. I've been worse." She knew that was true, and she suspected Trace knew it too. And there was something in the exchange between them that was the specific shorthand of people who had been through enough things together, that most of what needed to be said could be compressed into very few words. Trace looked at her. She looked at him. "This is Nora Maddox," Dex said. "She's why I'm standing." Trace looked at her again with a different quality of attention. She let him look. She was accustomed to adults needing time to recalibrate. "How old are you?" he said. 8. He turned to Dex. "She's 8. I'm aware. She cut you down from a tree and covered the site and redirected 4 scorpions through the pines," Dex said, "and got the location of tonight's ambush." The silence that followed had the quality of a man fundamentally revising something he had previously believed was settled. "There's something else," Nora said. She looked at both of them. "Rex Cutter is going to send word to your chapter around 8 o'clock that Dex is dead. He'll direct them to the ambush location." She described it: the intersection, the barn to the north, the open field with no cover. She said it plainly, the way she said everything without the performance of urgency, because the facts were urgent enough on their own, and performance only diluted them. Trace heard it with the stillness of a man receiving information he intended to act on. His face changed once quickly when she described the field with no cover, and then it went back to the expression it had been wearing. When he said, 10 o'clock, she said, "which means the word goes out at 8, which means your chapter has roughly 2 hours to receive bad information and decide how to respond to it." Trace looked at Dex. Dex said, "I need to be there. I need to walk into the chapter house and not be what Rex Cutter told them I was, and I need to give them what she just gave you before anyone does anything tonight that cannot be undone." Trace did not argue with this. He turned toward the truck. "Can you get up?" Nora said. "Working on it," Dex said. She positioned herself to his left, and he used her shoulder and the side of the truck in combination to get himself upright. And Trace came around and took the other side, and the 3 of them managed the geometry of getting a man with cracked ribs into a truck cab with a reasonable minimum of additional damage. The dog jumped into the truck bed before anyone suggested it found a spot, and lay down with the settled manner of an animal that had made a decision about where it belonged. Nora looked at the truck bed. She looked at the dog. Trace looked at the dog. "That your dog?" "He doesn't have a name yet," she said. She got in behind Dex's seat and the door closed and the engine came on, and they pulled back onto the county road heading west. The inside of the truck was quiet in the specific way of a vehicle carrying people who had recently come through something and were in the process of deciding what to do next. She sat with her backpack on her lap and looked out the window at the Tennessee evening moving past, and thought about everything that was in motion and everything that still needed to happen. There was the chapter meeting which needed to happen before 8 o'clock. There was the ambush location which needed to reach someone who could act on it. There was the phone call she knew she needed to make, not because of the operational problem, but because of the other problem. The one that had been present since she had heard the sound of the motorcycle engines on the logging road while she was working the knot in the tree. The one that had a face attached to it, and a name and a working schedule. Her mother got off at 6. She looked at the cab's clock. 6:22. She looked at the road ahead. Dex was looking at the road too. She could see his profile from her position, the cut above his eyebrow visible below the bandage, the deliberate stillness of a man managing pain by not attending to it. She watched him for a moment with the specific quality of attention she had developed across the afternoon, the attention she had developed from watching Buck watch his students, the kind that saw what was underneath what was visible. He was thinking about the chapter meeting. She could see that. But he was also thinking about something else, something older and more internal, something that the afternoon had moved in him that had not been moved in a while. She understood this because the afternoon had moved the same thing in her. She looked out the window at the fields going past the late light, lying across the grass in long, flat stripes. The line of trees at the horizon going dark against the pale orange of the western sky. "Trace," she said. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. "I need you to drive me home after the chapter house," she said. "My mother will be there." He glanced at Dex. Dex said, "Take her home, Trace. Whatever the chapter needs from me tonight, I can do after." She looked at the road ahead and thought about her mother arriving at the trailer on Route 9 and finding the door unlocked and the trailer empty. She thought about what that felt like. She had felt it herself when Buck's car was not in the driveway on the afternoon they came to tell them the specific drop in the stomach that happened when something that should be present was absent. She thought about Carla Maddox standing in the small kitchen in her diner uniform, calling a name and getting no answer. She thought about everything she was going to say when she got home, the order she was going to say it, in the way she was going to tell it all the way through without editing the way Buck had told her to tell things completely and honestly, and without selecting only the parts that were comfortable. She thought about what Gray had told her on the deer path, and what Dex had just told her in the hollow, and what it meant that Buck Maddox had spent 30 years making people, and had never fully known the shape of what he had made, or where it would go, or what it would do when the afternoon required it to do something. The truck moved west through the Tennessee evening, and the dog lay in the bed with his chin on his paws, and the clock on the dash moved toward the hours that would determine whether what she had done in the woods today had been enough, or had only been the beginning of enough. She thought it had been enough. She thought there was more to do. Both things were true at the same time, and she held them both without needing to resolve them the way Buck had taught her to hold complicated things openly, and without forcing them into a shape they were not yet ready to take. She was 8 years old. She was Buck Maddox's best student. She had not known the second thing until today, and the knowing of it was not a comfort exactly. Not the soft kind of comfort, but it was something she could carry. Something with weight and substance that would be there tomorrow and the day after. and all the days after that. When she came back to these woods on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and walked the trails he had mapped and felt where the knot wanted to fail and kept building. The county road ran west toward Harlan. The dog watched the trees go past with the steady attention of an animal that had nowhere else it needed to be. The iron horse sat on County Road 12 with its neon humming and its parking lot full, and Nora Maddox stood on the gravel outside it at 7:48 in the evening and looked at the door and added up what she had. She had 53 pounds, 8 years, a backpack with a coiled rope in it, and the specific kind of knowledge that came from 3 years of Thursday afternoons in the Tennessee woods, with a man who had been very precise about the difference between the things you could control and the things you could not. What she could control was what she said when she walked through that door, and how she said it. What she could not control was how 40 men in a Hells Angels chapter house responded to it. She went in. The room had the quality of a space that had recently been very loud and had gone quiet for a reason, the particular pressure of interrupted momentum. The kind of quiet that happened when men who had been moving toward a decision were stopped mid-motion by something none of them had anticipated. She understood this without being able to see the room's history. Understood it from the specific quality of the eyes that turned toward her. 30 or 40 pairs of them turning from the front of the room where a man was speaking and finding instead the door and the small figure standing in it. She looked at the room. The room looked at her. A girl, 8 years old, 53 pounds in a jacket and a backpack, with dirt on her knees and a fresh scratch on her left forearm from a branch in the pine section. Standing in the doorway of a Hells Angels chapter house at 7:48 on a Tuesday evening in October. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the man at the front of the room, older, heavy-set with the posture of someone who was accustomed to the room orienting around him, said, "Who let a kid in here?" "Nobody let me in," Nora said. "I came in." Her voice was even. She had decided on the drive over, sitting in the back of Trace's truck while Dex was on the phone. And the night was closing in that she was going to say what she had come to say in exactly the order it needed to be said. And she was not going to perform certainty or perform calm, because both of those things were true, and performing them would make them look smaller than they were. The man at the front of the room looked at the door, looked at Trace, looked at Dex, who was standing just inside the entrance, and something shifted in his expression when he looked at Dex. Something that was not quite what she would have expected. Not relief exactly, more like a man looking at a thing. He had already partly grieved and finding it present when he had not been certain it would be. Dex was supposed to be dead. That was what Rex Cutter had told them. The word had gone out at 7:52, 8 minutes from now, according to the plan, except that the word had gone out early because someone in Cutter's group had moved ahead of schedule, and Trace had gotten the call on the drive over. And that was why the room had been loud, and now was not. They had already received the word. They had already begun deciding what to do about it. She understood the shape of what she had walked into, and she walked into the center of it anyway. "My name is Nora Maddox," she said. She said it to the room in general, not to any specific face the way Buck had told her to address a group when you needed the group to hear you, rather than only the people directly in front of you. My grandfather was Buck Maddox. He ran a dojo in Harlan for 30 years before he died 2 years ago. She paused, a full second, the kind of pause Buck had used in the dojo, when he wanted something to land before he continued building on it. He trained Dex Harlow when Dex was 16 years old. He trained a scorpion named Gray when Gray was 17. The room had been quiet before. It went quieter. She kept going. Tonight at 10 o'clock, Rex Cutter's people are waiting at a location 4 miles east of town. She gave the intersection, she gave the barn to the north, she gave the open field with no cover. She said it plainly, the way she had said everything today without the performance of urgency. I know this because Gray told me. He told me because he made a choice this afternoon about what kind of man he was going to be. She stopped. He made that choice because of my grandfather. Because of what Buck Maddox spent 3 years building in him 35 years ago. And what Buck Maddox spent today building in me in a forest behind Harlan. When Gray found me on a deer path, and I told him what Rex Cutter was planning, and asked him to stop it. Nobody in the room moved. She looked at the man at the front of the room, the one with the posture of authority. She looked at the faces along the walls. She looked at all of them, and she did not look away. My grandfather spent 30 years teaching people how to stop fights. Before they started, she said. He said the fight you prevent is worth 10 you win. He never explained the reason to me directly. He just kept teaching, and he kept trusting that I would understand the reason when I needed it. She paused again. I need it tonight. You need it tonight. And if you ride to that intersection at 10 o'clock the way Rex Cutter wants you to ride there, every person he spent 30 years building something in will have done it for nothing. The room was absolutely still. She had said what she came to say. She stood in the stillness and let it be what it was, and she did not add to it or qualify it, because Buck had been very clear about the damage that talking past the right stopping point could do. Then Dex moved. He had been standing near the door to the right, and he moved forward through the room toward the front. In the way he moved through everything with the contained deliberateness of a man who had decided what he was going to do and was in the process of doing it. She watched him move, and she saw the room track him. Saw the attention of 40 people shift from her to him, and she understood that this was how it needed to go, that she had opened the space and now the space needed what it needed. And what it needed was the person in the room who could close it. He stopped beside her. He looked at the room. She's right, he said. His voice was different from the voice he had used across the afternoon. Not the voice of a man conserving resources or managing pain or navigating a practical situation. This was the voice underneath all of those, the one that had been there since 16. The one Buck Maddox had identified and spent 2 years working with. Buck Maddox trained me, he said. I was 16 and I was on my way somewhere bad, and he spent 2 years redirecting that. He paused. Then I spent 20 years going back toward bad anyway, making choices I knew were wrong while I was making them. And I didn't stop until today when his 8-year-old granddaughter cut me down from a tree in those woods and got the location of tonight's ambush from a scorpion who walked away from it because of what Buck built in him 30 years ago. He looked at the man at the front of the room. I'm telling you what I know. What I know is that Rex Cutter wants us at that intersection tonight. What I know is that I am standing in this room instead of in the ground, and I am standing here because of what this man left behind him. And what I know is that Buck Maddox would not spend 30 years building something in people just to watch them ride into a field with no cover, because they didn't stop to read the situation. The man at the front of the room looked at Dex for a long time. Then he looked at Nora. His face had changed from when she had walked in. The authority was still there, the posture of it, the habit of it. But it was sitting differently now, not as something that needed to be defended, but as something that could be used in a specific direction. He said, Trace. Trace was already at the back of the room with a phone in his hand. He had made 2 calls on the drive over. And she had listened to both of them without asking what they were for, because she had understood what they were for, from the specific economy of what he said and what he left out. The first call had been to someone he referred to only as the number, not a name, and what he had given them was the intersection, the barn, the field, and the timeline. He had ended the call with a phrase she had memorized on your side of it, meaning the legal side, meaning the side where what happened at 10 o'clock at that intersection happened in a documented and official way that would be difficult to walk back from, and difficult to explain, and difficult to absorb without structural consequences. The second call had been to someone inside the Scorpions, and that call had been shorter, 3 sentences. And what he had said in those 3 sentences was enough to know that there were people on the other side of this situation who had been waiting for this kind of call for longer than tonight. Entree said to the man at the front of the room, "It's on." The man looked at the room. "Nobody rides tonight," he said. He said it with the finality of a man who had made a decision and was not going to revisit it. Nobody goes near that intersection. He looked at Dex. "You're sure about the location?" "She told me," Dex said. Gray told her. He nodded. He looked at the faces around the room at the men who had been loud 15 minutes ago and were now quiet with the specific quality of men who were recalibrating, who were adjusting from one thing to a different thing and doing the work of that adjustment internally, which was the only place it could actually happen. Then he did something she had not anticipated. He looked at her. "You said your grandfather's name was Buck Maddox," he said. "Yes," she said. "He ran the dojo on Route 7. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment with the expression of a man holding something up to the light. "He told me once," he said, "that the most important thing he could teach was not any specific skill. He said the most important thing was the habit of stopping to read what was in front of you before you responded to it. He said most of the damage in his experience came not from bad intentions, but from people who had not stopped long enough to see what they were actually dealing with." He paused. "I was 22 when he told me that. I've been in this room for 14 years. He said it the way a man said something that had been true for a long time, and he had not found the right place to put it until now. I don't know if you know what that means, but he made a difference to more people than the ones you've met today." She knew what it meant. She let it mean what it meant without saying so. The room stayed where it was. At 9:57, Trace's phone rang. She knew from the way he answered it that this was the call they had been waiting for. He listened for 40 seconds without speaking, and then he said confirmed and ended the call and looked at the man at the front of the room and nodded once. The man nodded back. What had happened at the intersection on County Road 17, 4 miles east of Harlan, at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night in October, was not what Rex Cutter had prepared for. What Rex Cutter had prepared for was 35 Hells Angels arriving on motorcycles, at an intersection on a narrow road, arriving angry and fast, and not thinking clearly, because they had received news 40 minutes earlier, designed to make them arrive angry and fast, and not thinking clearly. He had prepared a field with no cover, and the specific geography of an ambush that had been scouted and planned and communicated to people who were ready for it. What arrived at that intersection at 10 o'clock was not 35 Hells Angels. What arrived was 2 vehicles with county plates and 1 vehicle with federal plates, and a 3rd vehicle that Trace had arranged through channels that did not need to be described in detail. Rex Cutter had been standing at the north edge of the field beside the barn when the lights came up the road, and he had registered the wrongness of what he was seeing in the 2 seconds it took the vehicles to stop. And in the 4 seconds after that, the situation had resolved itself in the specific and irreversible way that Situations resolved when they had been built on the assumption that no one knew what you were doing. And that assumption had been wrong. Rex Cutter was in custody before 10:15. 6 other members of the Scorpions were detained at the scene. Gray was not among them. Nobody said anything about Gray that night, or in the days that followed. Not from the Hells Angels side and not from the law enforcement side, and the specific gap in the accounting had the quality of something deliberate. Something that several people in several different positions had decided independently to leave alone. Nora learned this later. On the night itself, she was not at the chapter house anymore. Trace had taken her home at 8:45. She had asked him to park on the road rather than in the lot, and he had done it without asking why, with the instinctive understanding of a man who knew that entrances mattered, and that how you arrived at a thing was part of the thing itself. She got out of the truck. The dog jumped down from the bed and took his place beside her without being asked, and she stood on the road for a moment and looked at the trailer park and looked at the light in the window of the third trailer on the left, which was her mother's window, which meant her mother was home. Trace rolled down the window. "You good?" he said. She thought about the question. "Yes," she said. He looked at the dog. He looked at her. He said something she had not expected. "Buck Maddox," he said. "Your grandfather. I knew him to say hello to. I was in the hardware store once when he came in and I was maybe 25, and he looked at me and he said, 'That's a man who's gonna need to decide something important soon and he's putting it off.' Just said it like he was reading a sign." He paused. I didn't know what he meant until about 6 months later. He shook his head with the specific expression of a man holding an old thing carefully. I never forgot it. She absorbed this. She added it to everything else she had collected today, the inventory of a man she had known as her grandfather, and was learning in pieces and through other people's eyes. Was also other things she had not been old enough to see while he was alive. She thanked Trace for the ride. He said he would wait until she was inside. She walked across the gravel lot with the dog beside her, and she climbed the 3 steps to the trailer door, and she put her hand on the handle. Inside, she could hear the television, which meant her mother had been home for a while, which meant her mother had come home and found the trailer empty and had sat down to wait, and had turned the television on because it was better than the silence that came with waiting and not knowing. She opened the door. Carla Maddox was sitting at the kitchen table, not on the couch in front of the television, which meant she had been waiting specifically positioned in the room where she would see the door open first. She was still in her diner uniform, the pale blue shirt with the name tag. Her hair pulled back the way she wore it for work. She had a coffee mug in her hands that was not steaming, which meant it had been sitting there for a while. She looked at Nora. Nora came in. The dog came in behind her, and Carla's eyes moved to the dog and then back to Nora. And in the motion of that look, Nora could see everything her mother was holding and had been holding since she came home and found the door unlocked and no one inside. She could see the specific architecture of what a mother carried when she did not know where her child was, the way it arranged itself in the face and the hands and the set of the shoulders. She set her backpack down inside the door. She walked to the table and she pulled out the chair across from her mother. And she sat down. And she put her hands flat on the table surface the way Buck had always put his hands flat on things when he was about to say something that mattered. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to let me tell all of it before you say anything. Can you do that?" Carla looked at her daughter. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was working very hard to stay in the functional part of an emotion, rather than being taken over by it. A thing Nora recognized because she had spent 8 years watching her mother navigate a world that required this particular skill on a regular basis. "Start from the beginning," Carla said. Her voice was controlled in a way that told Nora clearly that the control was costing something. So she started from the beginning. She told it the way she had decided to tell it on the drive over, in sequence and without selection. The way Buck had told her to tell things when the truth was complicated completely and in order, and without the editing that turned a true account into a convenient one. She told about the dog and the chain link and the tree line and the man hanging upside down from the white oak. And she told about the knot and the 4 minutes and decks falling, and she told about the hollow and the scorpions arriving and Rex Cutter's voice on the logging road. And she told about the chase through the pines and Gray on the deer path, and what Gray had told her and what she had told Gray in return. And she told about the county road and Trace arriving and the drive to the Iron Horse and walking through the door, and what she had said to 40 men who had been about to ride to a place that Rex Cutter had prepared for them. She told all of it. Carla sat across the table and did not speak. She sat with the mug in her hands, and she listened the way she always listened when Nora told her important things, with her whole attention, with the focused quality of a woman who had learned that the most useful thing you could do for a person telling you something difficult was to receive it without interruption. When Nora finished, the kitchen was quiet. The television was still on in the other room. Some program with a laugh track that seemed to belong to a different universe from the one currently present in this kitchen. Carla set the mug down. She stood up. She did not come around the table. She stood at her own chair, and she looked at her daughter, and her face was doing the thing that Nora had seen it do before, only once on the morning after Buck's funeral, when Carla had come into Nora's room before the sun was up and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her for a long time without saying anything. The thing that was grief and something else so tangled together that there was no separating them. "He taught you all of that," Carla said. Her voice had the quality of someone speaking quietly, because any other volume would not hold what she was trying to put into it. "He taught me how to be in things," Nora said. She said it the same way she had said it to Dex in the forest. "There's a difference." Carla was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I know there's a difference." She came around the table then, and she put her hand on top of Nora's hand. Both hands, the grip that was a little tight in the way of a grip that was standing in for things that did not have words, and Nora did not pull away. "I'm angry," Carla said. "I know. I'm angry that you were out there alone and that you were in danger and that I wasn't there. And I'm angry that I'm sitting here looking at you when you're fine. And I was sitting here an hour ago not knowing if you were fine. And I need you to know that I understand why you did what you did. And I still need to be angry about it for a while." "Okay," Nora said. "That man would have died," Carla said. "Yes." Carla tightened her grip. "Your grandfather," she said, and her voice broke on the second word, the way voices broke when they carried too much weight for the structure of the sentence. "He would have said something so understated right now. He would have said something that sounded like nothing and meant everything." She shook her head. "He used to do that, and I used to want to shake him for it, and now I would give anything. He told Gray I was the best student he had in 30 years, Nora said. She said it quietly. "He told Gray he never said it to me because he didn't want me to stop working for it." She paused. "Dex said something similar. He said Buck told him he was going to be something or nothing, and it was up to him." Carla was still for a moment. He said the same kind of thing to me once, she said. She looked at the table. I was 19 and I was making what he called convenient choices, which was his way of saying I was choosing things because they were easy, rather than because they were right. And he looked at me over breakfast one morning and said, "Carla, the convenient version of a life is smaller than the real version, and you are not a small person." She exhaled. I didn't understand it for years. And then I understood it, and I couldn't stop understanding it. Nora looked at her mother. She was learning something tonight, something that she had not had the full shape of before about what it meant to be made by a person, about the reach of it, about the way the making did not stop at the borders of what you knew, but extended outward through time and through other people who carried pieces of it without knowing they were carrying them. She thought about Gray walking away north on the logging road, carrying what Buck had put in him 17 years ago and using it to make a choice tonight that redirected the whole shape of the evening. She thought about Dex standing in the hollow with his back against the limestone, telling her about being 16 and what Buck had said to him, and the 20 years of wrong choices that had followed, and the single afternoon in the woods that had altered the direction of something. She thought about the chapter president at the Iron Horse, saying he had known Buck to say hello to, and that Buck had looked at him and told him something true that he had not known what to do with for 6 months, and then had not been able to stop knowing. Buck Maddox had been dead for 2 years. He was in more rooms than Nora had known. The knock came at 20 minutes past 10. 3 knocks, deliberate, the kind that communicated something about the person, making them a quality of respect, combined with certainty. She recognized the knocking before she recognized the reason for recognizing it. Carla looked at the door. Nora stood up. She opened the door. Dex Harlow was standing on the trailer steps. He had changed his shirt, and someone had replaced the bandage over his eyebrow with a proper medical strip. And he was holding himself with the upright care of a man managing pain by keeping most of his attention off it. He looked cleaner than he had in the woods, but the bruising on the left side of his face had darkened considerably in the hours since the hollow, and the eye that had been swollen was open but narrowed. And he had the overall aspect of a man who had been through a significant physical event and was on the other side of it, but not far enough on the other side to pretend otherwise. Trace was at the bottom of the steps, hands in his jacket pockets, giving the door and the people at it whatever space they needed. Dex looked at Nora. She looked at him. Her mother appeared beside her in the doorway. Dex looked at Carla. His face did not change in any defensive way. He held her gaze with the steady patience of a man who understood he was being evaluated and had decided that the honest response to evaluation was to be accurately visible. "You're him," Carla said. "Yes, ma'am." He said his name. He told her he was sorry to come to the door at this hour, and he told her why he had come to tell her in person what her daughter had done. Not as a courtesy, he said, but because he needed her to know it from someone who had been there, who had been the recipient of it, who could tell her what it actually was, rather than what it sounded like when described from outside. "She's 8 years old," Carla said. "I know that. You understand what 8 years old means." "I understand it," he said, and what was in his voice was not the placating tone of a man trying to manage a situation, but the plain acknowledgement of a man who understood the magnitude of what he was saying yes to. "And I understand that what happened today should not have been something she had to do. I understand that it was dangerous and that she had no business being in it by any reasonable measure. and I understand that the fact of how she handled it is not something I am taking lightly." He looked at Carla directly. "I came because you need to know that your daughter walked into a room full of men tonight and said the thing that stopped something from happening that would have been very bad. And she said it the way her grandfather would have said it, which is the highest thing I know how to say about anyone." Carla was quiet. Her jaw moved once. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. He came in. He had to angle slightly through the door. He stood in the small kitchen and looked at the table and the chairs, and the child's drawings on the refrigerator, and the row of things on the windowsill above the sink. And he looked at them the way a man looked at a room that reminded him of a kind of life he had spent years at a distance from, carefully and without presumption. The dog came out from under the table and pressed his nose against Dex's hand. Dex put his hand on the dog's back. Carla said, "Sit before you fall down." He sat. She got him water without asking if he wanted it. She put the mug back on the stove for more coffee. She sat down at the table and she looked at him with the specific attention of a woman who had decided to receive what was in front of her, rather than manage it from a distance. He talked about Buck. He talked about the specific things he remembered, the things that had stayed in him across 20 years, and a life that had gone in the wrong direction from what Buck had been trying to build. He talked about a particular afternoon in the dojo, when Buck had made him untie and retie the same knot 40 times. Not because the knot mattered intrinsically, but because Buck had told him that the patience required to do a thing correctly. The 40th time, when you had done it wrong 39 times, was the patience required for everything else. And he had not understood what everything else meant until he was standing in a clearing this afternoon watching an 8-year-old girl work a constrictor hitch loose from a tree trunk, with the focused attention of someone who had done it wrong enough times to know exactly which way to go. Carla listened. The coffee finished and she poured it and set it in front of him without him asking. And he took it. And she poured one for herself. And they sat at the kitchen table and it was 10:30 at night. And Nora sat across from both of them and listened to her mother and this man exchange pieces of someone they had both known. Pieces that were different shapes from different angles, and she assembled them into something more complete than she had had before. "He never told you he talked about you to the people he trained," Dex said to Nora. "He said it not as a question. He didn't talk about people directly," Nora said. "He talked about principles." Dex looked at his coffee. "He taught me something once," he said, "that I have thought about more times than I can count. He said the most important thing he could teach anyone was not a technique or a skill or a piece of knowledge. He said the most important thing was the moment of stopping, the moment before you do the thing. He said most of the damage he had seen in 30 years came from people who skipped that moment, who moved from impulse to action, without the pause in between where you read what was actually in front of you instead of what you expected to find." He paused. He said the people who had that pause, the ones who had built it into themselves so that it happened automatically, those were the people who changed things. Carla looked at her daughter. "He said that to you too," she said. "Not in those words. He said most of the damage in the world came from people who forgot to look," Nora said. "He said the looking was the most important part." Carla pressed her lips together. "Yes," she said quietly. "That sounds right." Dex reached into the interior pocket of his vest and held out his hand across the table. In his palm was a coin, brass, worn smooth at the edges, the surface marked with a design she could not fully read from her angle, but which she understood from its presentation to be something specific and not casual. "This is a challenge coin," he said. "From the chapter. We give them to people who have earned them." He paused. "There is no version of earning one more completely true than what happened today." Nora looked at the coin. She looked at her mother. Carla gave her the nod that was not permission exactly, but something more like recognition. The specific acknowledgement of a woman who understood what was being given and what it meant, and had decided that her daughter had earned the right to receive it. Nora took the coin. It was heavier than its size suggested. She turned it once in her fingers and felt the weight of it and the warmth it had carried from his pocket, and she held it in her closed hand and looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "No," he said. His voice was different now from any register it had occupied during the afternoon or the evening. Quieter. Something in it that had been tightly held for a long time and was not tightly held anymore. "Thank you." He left 20 minutes later. Trace was at the bottom of the steps, patient as he had been all evening, and they walked together to the truck at the road decks, moving with more steadiness than he had on the gravel shoulder of the county road 3 hours ago. And Nora watched from the doorway as the truck's taillights moved away down Route 9 and took the curve and disappeared. Carla came and stood beside her. For a while, neither of them said anything. The trailer park was doing its ordinary things around them. The sounds of other people's evenings. A television somewhere, a car door closing, the specific nighttime sounds of Harlan going about its nighttime business, entirely unaware that an hour ago something had been redirected in a field 4 miles east of town. "Mom," Nora said. Her mother looked at her. "He told Gray that I was the best student he had." She said it quietly, looking at the road where the truck had gone. "He told a stranger. He never told me. I know Carla said. Did you know?" Carla was quiet for the moment. "Then I knew he thought it." She paused. "He told me once, not about you specifically. He said it in a general way, that the student he had been waiting for the whole time had finally shown up. He said it was someone who listened with their whole self, not just with their ears. He said she was going to be ready for things he couldn't even prepare her for. He said all he could do was make sure she knew the knot held." Nora stood in the doorway. She stood there for a moment with everything the day had given her, all of it, present at once, the hollow and the deer path and the iron horse and the drive home, and the kitchen table and Dex's voice and her mother's face, and all of it arranged around the fixed point of Buck Maddox in these woods, every Thursday afternoon, pressing rope into her hands and saying, "Feel where the knot wants to fail." She knew where the knot wanted to fail. She knew how to find the angle. She went inside. The dog followed and settled under the table at her feet, his warmth against her ankles, and she sat down and opened her hand and looked at the coin one more time. The brass caught the kitchen light. She closed her fingers around it. Then she looked at the dog. He was looking back at her with the specific patient attention he had been directing at everything since the afternoon in the woods, the attention of an animal that had followed her into something and come out the other side of it, and was now fully and irreversibly here in this kitchen, in this life, with no intention of being anywhere else. She put her hand on his head. "Buck," she said. His tail moved, not the uncertain arc of an animal that did not know if it was welcome. The full, steady movement of an animal that had just been given its name and understood in the way that dogs understood the things that mattered, that it was the right one. Carla looked at the dog. She looked at Nora. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, that's right." That's exactly right. Nora set the coin on the table in front of her. She looked at it. She looked at the backpack she had set by the door when she came in. The backpack with the coiled rope inside it. The rope she had taken from the white oak after she untied it. Coiled it the way Buck had taught her and packed it away. She thought about the clearing in the woods behind Harlan, the branch where the rope had been, the bark abrasion that would still be there tomorrow and the day after, the white oak standing in the dark with its empty branch, and the particular quality of a space where something had been and was no longer. She thought about what she had done and what it had set in motion, and where all of that motion had arrived by 10 o'clock tonight. She thought about the knot, not the specific knot, though she thought about that too, the constrictor hitch that had taken 4 minutes to work loose, the technique Buck had made her practice until her hands knew it in the dark. She thought about the larger thing, the thing that a knot was a version of the thing that held things together when the weight came on them, and the question was whether what you had built was sound. She thought about whether what Buck had built was sound. She thought about Gray walking north on the logging road, making a choice that 30 years of a specific training had made possible. She thought about Dex standing in the Iron Horse, saying things he had needed 20 years to get back around to saying. She thought about a chapter president who had known Buck to say hello to and had carried something Buck told him for 14 years and had used it tonight when it was needed. She thought about all of it. The knot held, she said. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. Not directed at anyone in the room or anyone not in the room. Just the stating of a fact in the plain way that plain facts deserve to be stated. Her mother looked at her. She did not ask what it meant. She looked at her daughter's face, and she knew what it meant. The way mothers know the things that matter to their children. When they know their children well enough. The way Carla Maddox had always known the things that were underneath what Nora said. When Nora said something that carried more than its surface. Yes, Carla said softly. It held. Outside, the Tennessee night did what October nights did in Harlan, pressed close and cold, and indifferent to the small, specific dramas of the people living inside it. The lights of Route 9 moved through the windows in the usual patterns. Somewhere east of town on County Road 17, a field was empty, and a barn stood in the dark, and the geography of what had almost happened there was slowly becoming the geography of what had not happened, which was a different and better kind of place. Nora sat at the kitchen table with the coin in front of her and the dog under the table, and her mother across from her and the backpack by the door with the rope coiled inside it. Tomorrow she would go back to the woods, not because she needed to, because the woods were where she knew how to be, where Buck had taught her how to move through things rather than around them, where every trail and hollow and limestone outcropping was a kind of conversation that had not ended when he had ended, that was still ongoing, that was available to her on every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for as long as she chose to show up for it. She would go back tomorrow and she would walk the section near the white oak, and she would look at the branch where the rope had been, and she would not feel the absence of the rope, the way she felt the absence of him, with the specific weight of something that had been essential and was no longer present but would feel instead the clean space where it had been, which was its own kind of presence, which was what it looked like when a knot had done its work and held, and the thing it was holding had been set free. She was 8 years old. She was Buck Maddox's best student. He had never told her. She had heard it today from two men who had been made by the same hands, men who had gone different directions with what those hands had built in them, and had arrived at the same place tonight. Because of a girl in the woods with a backpack and a dog who ran. She had the coin. She had the rope. She had the name she had just given the dog, and the name Buck had given her, without saying it directly. which was the way he gave the most important things wrapped in practice and patience and the slow accumulation of Thursday afternoons. She held all of it. The knot held.